They've sold more than 45 million records worldwide.
They're the bad boys of rock and roll.
Motley Crue is a gang that happens to play instruments.
Vince, Nicky, Tommy, incredible celebrities.
Nicky's the thinker of the bunch.
I'm very dark in the way I see things.
Vince brings the showmanship. Mick Mars lets his guitar do the talking.
And Tommy just is 12 years old all the time.
Anything goes.
We were like out of our minds.
But all the partying took its toll.
They would keep spending their money on drugs.
This is crazy.
They blew up. Nicky said, "You're fired." Vince said, "I'm leaving."
It was time for everybody just to, like, hit the reset button.
We were at that point where one of us was going to die.
In 1983, heavy metal band Motley Crue released their second album, Shout at the Devil, and it was an instant success, particularly the title track.
Shout at the Devil, as soon as you hear the first riffs on that song, it's just instant. I mean, your head just starts nodding to it.
200,000 copies of Shout at the Devil were sold in its first 2 weeks, but charges of Satanism were soon leveled at the band.
Tommy Lee had a pentagram on his drum in the video. They had like headbands with a pentagram on it.
You've been accused of devil worship and inciting violence. Now, did you do it, guys? Did you? I mean, is it true?
The thing about Shout at the Devil was shout at the devil, shout at war, shout at anything that's negative, you know? It's supposed to be a positive message, but everyone took it, you know, it was at, not with. Come on.
Though the publicity resulting from the band's references to Satanism turned off radio stations across the country, it was only one of the many controversies that would plague the members of Motley Crue in their 28-year journey together. One that started out in the rock clubs of Hollywood's Sunset Strip. In early 1981, 4 Southern California musicians joined forces to create Motley Crue, who would become one of the biggest bands in rock history.
What makes a really great or interesting band is when you have 4, diverse characters that are not supposed to get along, and, they kind of join together.
It's weird how we came together.
Guitarist Mick Mars and bass player Nicky Sixx had actually met several years earlier. By late 1980, 22-year-old Nicky had made a name for himself in a band called London, but wanted to go out on his own. He met drummer Tommy Lee, who was a high school student at the time.
So I went and met Nicky. He's playing me a bunch of stuff that immediately I just started drumming on the table to, and we hit it off like that.
Nicky had seen an ad placed by Mick in the local paper.
It just said, loud, rude, aggressive guitar player, no bull. Call Mick Mars.
And he called me.
We opened the door, and this dude is like right out of the Addams Family. We're like, whoa, look at that guy, dude. Just really creepy and weird, but cool and funny.
And then he goes, "Hey, aren't you that guy?" I'm like, yeah.
And we jammed.
Nicky, Mick, and Tommy now needed to find a frontman. Tommy remembered the singer in a rival high school band, Vince Neil.
He was the local pretty boy, glamour boy, who was this amazing singer.
They went to check Vince out at a local club where he was performing with his band, Rock Candy.
We walked in there, and I saw this little blonde-haired kid, 19 years old. I was looking at him, I was watching all the girls just like going crazy over him. And I'm like, that's the guy that we need in this band. Whether he can sing or not, doesn't matter, because it's like sex sells. Well, Vince could sing. So I was going like, good, this is all good, it's even better.
Everyone was like, this rules. He's the guy. We're done.
Now, all the band needed was a name.
Mick thought of the name. He said at one time he was sitting around with all of his friends, and someone comes in and goes, "Isn't this a motley-looking crew?"
Oh, that's
and he goes, "Well, that's kind of cool."
Motley Crue had been born. Its members immediately undertook a guerrilla marketing campaign.
We would go to like the place and print up a ton of posters, staple guns, and we would just go all over Hollywood, up and down the canyons, every telephone pole.
Putting up our posters, you know, to come see us at the Troubadour or the Starwood.
We're like a little street team gang. Like, we would go out and just plaster the place at night.
Young Crue made a name for itself with its elaborate, if homemade, theatrics.
He used to douse himself with lighter fluid and light his legs on fire.
The word of mouth got around that there's this band, Motley Crue, and they put on this really crazy stage show. You know, within 6 months, we were headlining sold-out shows on the Strip.
You'd see these huge lines at the Whiskey or the Roxy or the Troubadour, and you'd go, who is that? And you would think it could be anyone from Elton John to AC/DC, but it was Motley Crue.
Motley's elaborate costumes helped differentiate them from other groups on the Sunset Strip.
The look was just very much what Motley was about. They were these four big, tough guys. They had this big puffy hair. They had these huge platform shoes, these leather straps with studs. They had this scary makeup.
You know, we were glam, pop, punk, heavy metal. We're a mess.
They were completely different from anything else that was on the Sunset Strip. That was a time of new wave.
There wasn't anybody out there like us. Nowhere.
Throughout 1981, the fledgling band struggled to gain a foothold in the LA music scene. The band members, however, were already living the rock star lifestyle.
We got a little apartment, me, Vince, and Nikki.
And I go over there, of course, periodically and stuff to see what they're up to. And it was such a run-down place.
There was huge piles of trash. Roaches were everywhere, so we'd take the hairspray and a lighter, and we just, like, you just see them just going up the wall. We'd like...
We would play at the Whiskey A Go-Go, which is right down the street, and after the show, I'd just go, everybody, let's just go to our place.
I mean, our apartment was this big.
There would be 200-300 people in this little 2-bedroom apartment.
People would throw through the windows. People are passing out. Cops are coming, kicking in the door.
The police had kicked in the door so many times that the bolt was broken on it. David Lee Roth would come to a lot of our shows, and we're all sitting around doing coke, and somebody had pounded on the door, and the door just kind of fell off his hinges and like fell right on Dave. Just went, "Pip."
The decadence escalated.
We would light Nikki on fire in the house because we were always testing like new pyro tricks. We found this gel to like put on your pants, and we would light them up in the house.
Nobody even stopped. Nobody even cared.
Back then we were like, it, let's do it. No one cared about anything.
We were like out of our minds.
It was a lot of fun though.
Motley Crue was fast becoming the hard-partying band the world would come to know. One very bad night, though, would almost destroy the group just as they were getting started. By the spring of 1981, Motley Crue was clawing its way to the top of the LA music scene. And the young band members, Mick, 25, Tommy, 18, Vince, 20, and Nikki, 22, were living out their wildest dreams. Alan Kaufman, a businessman with no music industry experience, was interested in getting into the music business and proposed that he promote and manage the band.
He said, okay, I got a guy, we can go in the studio, we can do a record. And we recorded the album in like a week and a half or 2 weeks.
Too Fast for Love was released on their own label, Leather Records.
The lyrics are obviously not about love and romance. They basically took pop songs, but toughened them up completely. They've got these really heavy guitar solos on it. This was just very loud and aggressive.
Motley sold over 20,000 copies of Too Fast for Love.
We were playing around all the clubs, selling them out of the trunk of a car, and went like, whoosh.
And it helped take the band to the next level.
All of a sudden, we're playing the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium.
It just like snowballed into this huge thing.
Record companies started noticing. They're like, look, these guys are doing this without anybody's help.
We better grab them.
Here comes, Tom Zutat from Elektra Records going, I'm signing you guys immediately. And we were like, whoa. And then we got a record contract. And I remember being a senior in high school going like, okay. High school diploma, recording contract, tour of the world, and go rock.
Went from being completely broke and unable to even feed myself to being a multimillionaire.
Elektra released a remixed version of Too Fast for Love, and the band embarked on its Cruising Through Canada tour. By late 1982, Motley had outgrown Alan Kaufman, and the band hired veteran managers Doug Thaler and Doc McGee.
When I saw them on New Year's Eve, I couldn't even understand what they were playing. I mean, they were just rolling around, blowing up. It was awesome. And I saw 3,500 kids just going crazy. I went, what do you have to know? You know what I mean? There's taped this around the world.
Under new management, the band produced their second album, Shout at the Devil. The track, Looks That Kill, was released as a single in February of 1984 and spent 10 weeks on the charts.
The song shows where the four of them, I think, really come together. Vince has got this pouty kind of vocal. And then the riffs that Mick plays on it. Nicky, you know, he's got the bass that's holding down with the drums. And they say the clock strikes midnight and Tommy hits this gong.
The Crue sold 500,000 copies of Shout at the Devil. As Motley's music shot to the top of the charts, their bad behavior also escalated.
There's endless stories.
I mean, at every hotel they would do something.
They used to do what other people did in the 60s, which is like throw television sets out the window. They took it to another degree.
They shot a flare gun in a hotel room in Switzerland and almost burned down the hotel. You know, they saw beds in half and make the bed so when you sit down it would fall apart. We had to put up $15,000 deposits to get them into a Howard Johnson.
They were not an easy band to manage.
They're just crazy.
In late 1984, band members returned to Los Angeles after a triumphant tour. Before starting work on a new album, they decided to take a well-deserved break.
All the band members had just gotten our first really taste of money.
On December 8th, Nicky was in Martinique, while the other band members gathered at Vince's house.
We're having like a cool barbecue, party.
The drummer of the band Hanoi Rocks, Nicholas Dingley, a.k.a. Razzle, was hanging out with the band.
And Vince just bought a Pantera car, fast as hell.
The store was just right down the street, and let's go get some beer. And it was just on the way back, I lost control of the car and spun out of control.
Razzle, in the passenger seat, was struck by an oncoming car.
Way down the street with sirens, and went out on the balcony, looked, you just see red lights, fire trucks, ambulances. We're like, that can't be. So I remember just hauling down the street, and I'll never, ever forget this in my life. I can see Vince's car, and it's just smashed in the center of the road. I walk up, and I see Vince sitting on the curb like this, just crying, freaking out, and shaking. And I see Razzle's shoes. I remember seeing his shoes sitting in the middle of the street, and I was just like, this is not happening.
He actually died in my arms,
Neil was involved in a head-on traffic accident in Redondo Beach last night. The passenger in his car was killed.
Well, I was at the MTV Awards in New York when I got the call.
Neil was charged with drunk driving and released on $2,500 bail.
It was going to be ugly, and we all thought that Motley was over as Motley Crue at that point.
Motley Crue, not even 4 years old at the time, seemed about to be destroyed by their own excess.
Unbelievable, man.
In 1984, just as Motley Crue had achieved its first real success, a band member's bad behavior had almost destroyed it.
Neil was involved in a head-on traffic accident.
Singer Vince Neil's drunken car accident killed friend Nicholas Razzle Dingley, and both people in the car that Vince hit suffered serious injuries.
The other two people, they had brain damage.
It seemed likely that Motley would lose its frontman, which would mean the end of the original band.
People do have to be accountable for what they do.
I had to pay out, $2.5 million to the victims. I went to jail.
Vince's jail time and fines were nothing compared to the remorse he felt for what he had done. He could continue to make music with Motley Crue, though he would have to clean up his act, starting with court-mandated sobriety throughout his 5-year probation.
And he has griped that I'm trying to stay clean, and they thought it was funny leaving over and say, "Oh, Vince, can you hand me that line of Coke?
Can you make me a drink and pass this beer here?"
This is not a highly sensitive band.
Had no support, none, zero.
Vince's accident and his fight to stay sober caused immense amounts of friction within the group.
Having the band explode and be that big and then have something like this happen.
The best way I can sum it up is he hurt a lot of people.
It was like, guys, it's an accident, and they didn't see it that way.
Vince wasn't any more out of control than anybody else was. It's just that he was now the guy that was wrecking the band.
That just really pushed me out of the band. I was just kind of the singer. I was just kind of there.
The Crue did return to the studio, however, and produced the hugely successful Theater of Pain, which shot up to number 6 on the Billboard charts, the highest position of any of their albums to date.
But when we came out with Theater of Pain and Smoking in the Boys' Room and Home Sweet Home, really broke the band.
Smoking in the Boys' Room became the band's first top 40 single, but Home Sweet Home, with its live concert music video, was the standout song on the album.
I'm a dreamer. It showed a lot of people for the first time what life on the road was like. It was new. You see, like, Vince Neil is leaning over and he's singing right to this one girl, and she's losing her mind. Somebody's pulling up her shirt to flash the band. You just see what life is like with this crew. I think it appealed to people because you had this big, tough band, and they're singing about going home sweet home. They were vulnerable.
While the band was touring with Theater of Pain, Tommy began dating actress Heather Locklear. They were married in May of 1986. The following year, the Crue released Girls, Girls, Girls.
What's the name of the next album called? Right here, dude. Girls, Girls, Girls. That's the name. They can't change it now because it's tattooed on my arm.
Girls, Girls, Girls is the ultimate 80s party album. It is whiskey, it's women, it's staying out all night long. You can hear the motorcycles revving on that album. It was like a diary into the life of Motley Crue.
We were definitely inspired by Girls. These days, you'll never see me in a strip club. But in those days, we went every night, before shows, after shows. It was like, you know what? This whole thing needs a theme song. Now it's an anthem. Pretty awesome. Like every time you walk into a place, it's playing.
Girls, Girls, Girls sold more than 2 million copies and eventually went double platinum. Motley took the title of their album literally, especially while on tour.
They always had a lot of women around them all the time.
Never a shortage of girls.
There's always girls, always.
Naked girls, antics on the bus that weren't made for human eyes.
There's girls before the show, during the show, and after the show. That was what we were all about, the debauchery. The real sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was Motley Crue.
When the Girls, Girls, Girls tour hit Japan in December 1987, Motley Crue's reputation as the bad boys of rock and roll was cemented.
Every time we went to Japan, something happened. They found pot in Tommy's drum case, confiscated all the equipment. On one tour, they hit a Japanese guy in the back of the head with a Jack bottle on a bullet train, put him in the hospital.
They called the police ahead, and when the train came into the station, full military guys and a SWAT team waiting for these guys to arrest them.
We all went to jail for that, which was fun. I had to sit there for 5 hours with Nikki, with handcuffed. This wasn't like management, this was like full contact management.
It was clear that the lessons of Vince's crash had been lost on the band.
The madness continued, like that wasn't enough.
The band's drug and alcohol abuse had reached new heights. Vince himself had fallen off the wagon and was drinking heavily again.
I was drinking a bottle of gin, on stage at a lot of those concerts.
And he wasn't alone.
I drank a lot, I fell off the stage quite a few times.
There was always booze, and there's always dope, and you know, coke, and later on heroin.
I mean, when you're shooting heroin, and then you run out and you're like, well, what else is there to shoot? And you're looking around, and you're like shooting Jack Daniels. You're like, dude, what the f are we doing? Like, this is insanity. Like, this is not cool.
Nicky had become addicted to heroin, and his life off stage was spinning out of control.
He had barricaded himself in the room and like was perched on top of this thing, just scared to death, like people were after him, and we had to play a gig that night. And I'm going, oh man.
He really was more predestined to be a drug addict, let's say, just because, you know, he didn't really have a family. You know, he had no father figure. You know, his mother kind of basically disowned him.
In December 1987, the Girls, Girls, Girls tour finished up in Japan, and the band returned to LA for a short break before heading out again to Europe.
The dark side was when they were home and Nicky was by himself and cooped up at his place.
I'd go over to his house, and he's got a gun out, and he's shooting imaginary people in the speakers and being, you know, crazy. Everyone was just kind of waiting around to see, you know, when the bomb was gonna go off.
The bomb went off on December 22nd, 1987.
I remember getting the phone call in the middle of the night from our tour manager, and saying that Nicky had died. And like, what?
In 1987, Motley Crue, the bad boys of rock and roll, had come a long way. Together, their last 3 albums, Shout at the Devil, Theater of Pain, and Girls, 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 had sold over 1 million albums. It seemed like one band member, though, bass player Nicky Sixx, had thrown it all away. On December 22nd, local radio stations reported that Nicky had died of a heroin overdose.
You know, getting that phone call wasn't exactly peachy.
The reports were not true. Nicky had come close to dying but had been revived by a paramedic. When he regained consciousness, he fled the hospital.
As soon as he woke up, of course, he's like Nicky Sixx, so he got pissed and angry at everybody and walked out of the hospital in his gown.
What does he do? You know, he goes back home and shoots up. You know, it's like, he was a complete mess.
Once again, one member's bad behavior set the other 3 against him.
That was when Doug and I started talking and just said, you know, this is crazy. We canceled the European tour.
Our manager at the time said that if we go to Europe, one of them will be coming back in a body bag. And that was like, it was true.
We just said we're gonna have to do an intervention or we have to quit. Because we're not gonna watch the guys die.
Obviously it affected the band, you know, where it scared them.
We went after Nicky first because he was a mess. I took him to my house and detoxed him in my house. And we finally got him into a treatment center, and then everybody followed suit.
It was time for everybody just to like hit the reset button and stop.
Mick Mars didn't believe in traditional drug rehab programs, though, and decided to kick his alcohol habit on his own.
It wasn't hard for me to stop drinking. I just went, no, that's done.
We were all sober for, you know, a couple years.
The number one thing about getting sober is you can think clearly and you can function, and when you go into the studio, you're able to do what you're supposed to do, which is record and write music.
It was an amazing time musically for him. You know, it was just because they could focus and get into it.
We were like a machine, and it felt really good.
The newly sober Crue recorded their 5th studio album, Dr. Feelgood, in the spring and summer of 1989.
It was a good time for us. We made a great record. We had a great tour.
They were probably at their peak musically in the Dr. Feelgood period.
Dr. Feelgood was the album for Motley Crue that finally did hit #1.
And it really rocketed us up.
Included in the album was the song Kickstart My Heart, inspired by Nicky's near-fatal overdose.
is rock and roll at its finest.
Riding high after the successful and sober Dr. Feelgood recording session, the band headed to the Moscow Music Peace Festival. The concert, held in August of 1989, was organized by Doc McGee to raise funds for an anti-drug charity he started after being convicted of marijuana smuggling.
Moscow's pretty bitchin'. It's kind of like LA, just a little bit different.
But the band was upset when they perceived that manager Doc McGee favored another client, Bon Jovi, during the festival, getting the other band permission to use pyrotechnics and a time slot that apparently upstaged Motley Crue.
Turned out to be a disaster for all concerned.
They ended their 6-year relationship with him. Co-manager Doug Thaler, though, continued to represent Motley Crue.
I had pretty much had enough, and they had. And Moscow was the last show.
I think it was over just ego.
I look back on it now and I said I would never put up with that ever again.
By early 1990, band members were, one by one, leaving sobriety behind.
They were working to stay clean, but everybody eventually was having slip-ups.
Slowly, just like, oh, I think I can have a beer. You know, it's kind of the slide, you know, back into it.
The last night of the tour, of course, we're in Hawaii. What a better place to just fire it up, right? So me and Vince are in a strip club. Here comes the girl with the crazy test tube, those stupid shots, and we're like, I look at him, he looks at me, and we're like,
You have a band that's that extreme, it's not going to be all of a sudden you turn the page and it's happily ever after.
In 1991, Decade of Decadence, the band's first compilation album, was released. That year, Vince Neil became a father when his wife, mud wrestler Charisse Rodell, gave birth to a daughter, Skylar. But responsibilities of fatherhood would not curtail his lifestyle. Vince and the other members of the crew had all gone back to drinking and drug abuse, and for Vince, it affected his work.
Someone starts blowing off rehearsals, stops showing up, feels like they stopped caring.
One day at the studio, things turned ugly.
You know, Vince likes to have his version of it, and I like to have my version of it.
That was a, you know, he said, she said thing.
Vince was dealing with his demons and wasn't being completely honest.
The man felt like he'd been lying to him.
I showed up at rehearsal and you know, it was F you, F you.
Nikki said, you're fired. Vince said, I'm leaving.
You know, we made a pact to not drink. We made a pact to not do drugs. And he was drinking, and that was a breakdown for the band.
I just think they just didn't want me in the band anymore.
Being that we are these rabid dogs, we really sometimes, you know, we will attack, but sometimes we attack each other.
It was like, you know, we're gonna let you out of your contract and you can go and do whatever you want to do. And I was just shocked. I go, you're kidding me, right?
For the first time in over a decade, Vince was on his own.
I just thought the best thing for myself was to get in the studio right away and put out a record and put out you know, I had a song within 6 weeks on the radio with You're Invited But Your Friend Can't Come, and it felt good. It felt like I really felt alive being on my own. But it was like I had to humble up a bit. Instead of headlining arenas, I went out open for Van Halen, you know, and I was the opening act again.
Part of the Motley Crue code had always been that each band member was irreplaceable.
In this band, there's 4 individual characters. It's and if one left or one was replaced, it would never be the same.
So if one person left, it wouldn't be magic anymore.
I mean, you split off the bat.
But in September of 1992, the Crue broke its own rule and brought in singer John Corabi to replace Vince. They had been practicing with John for a few months, but only now made it official.
The band at that time thought, well, this is a good thing.
There was 4 ingredients. We took 1/4 out and put a stronger 4th in.
It's just better. Better, faster, louder.
It's about now. It's not about then. That's over. It's dead. It's past tense. You know, you can't live in the past.
Die-hard Crue fans were not happy.
When Vince Neil left the band, that brought a lot of division among fans.
The band's first album with their new vocalist was boldly titled Motley Crue.
The sound is a complete change from the regular Motley Crue sound.
Its highly anticipated release in 1994 was only modestly successful.
When a frontman leaves a band, it's the voice of the band, it's the showman, and that's what people are looking for the most when they go to a concert. The album didn't work out well, and the band was facing, do we try to bring back Vince or do we carry on?
After a decade of tearing up the heavy metal music scene, one of the hugest acts in rock history seemed about to implode.
Everything that we've worked for, we're watching it all head for a big giant crash and burn.
By 1994, Motley Crue had released their first album without charismatic frontman Vince Neil. Vince had left the band following a dispute in 1992 and was now pursuing a solo career. But he put his music on hold when his 4-year-old daughter Skylar became gravely ill.
All of a sudden, you know, we thought she had her appendix went out, and you know, later found out it was cancer of the stomach. You know, and as a father, you know, you want to protect your kids, and you know, you can't. She was diagnosed in April, and by August she had passed away.
When Vince told me about losing his daughter to, you know, a tumor, I think that was like the hardest thing for him to say. It was definitely like the hardest time in his life.
I hadn't talked to anybody. I was just living on the beach in Malibu. I had no plans to do anything at that time. I'd pretty much written off Motley at that point.
Motley's fans had seemed to write off the band as well, but Alan Kovac, who'd taken over as the band's manager in 1994, had a plan.
I said, you really need to replace Corabi with Vince. And if you do, you'll have a career, and if you don't, you won't.
Mick, Nicky, and Tommy needed Vince back in Motley Crue, and Vince needed Motley Crue just as much.
I knew I could convince Vince that playing in arenas was better than slogging it out and trying to develop your own career. And that worked.
Corabi was released from Motley Crue, and Vince rejoined the band in 1997 after a 5-year absence. The band was back, but it wasn't a smooth re-entry.
I hated being back in the band. I was kind of talked into it, you know, being back in Motley Crue.
When Motley entered the studio to record Generation Swine, their first album as a reunited group, Vince had difficulty reconnecting.
I didn't like the songs. I didn't like anybody. I was just kind of going through the motions.
And the album suffered.
It debuted at #4, but then beyond that, it just kind of went off the charts.
It wasn't a very good record at all. You know, it was a bad time for the band. Nobody's really into it anymore.
The band felt that their record label, Elektra, had failed to support the album. When it came time to renew their contract with the label, the Crue had a choice.
They could continue with Elektra and receive large advances, or move on their own and own what every band would love to own. They chose to own their content.
When Motley Crue left Elektra Records, they were able to take their masters with them, which is pretty unique considering how successful Motley Crue was for that label.
The band now owned the rights to all of their music and formed Motley Records so they could build on their earlier successes.
The Beatles don't own their masters, but Motley Crue do. Motley decided to bet on themselves.
In 1999, Motley released a compilation album called Crucial Crue. But as the band was trying to get back on track musically, one of their members was derailing personally. Tommy Lee's marriage to third wife Pamela Anderson was notoriously rocky. In 1998, Lee was arrested and pled no contest to spousal abuse, and was sentenced to 6 months in jail. Shortly after his release, Tommy Lee decided to pursue personal projects. He wanted no part of Motley Crue.
At the time, I think they were playing like gymnasiums in like Canada. Tommy felt like he really wanted to get into like kind of techno and electronic music.
Randy Castillo, Ozzy Osbourne's longtime drummer, was brought in to replace Tommy on the drums. Once again, the Crue was operating without an original band member. Fans and critics felt the loss.
To me, it's not Motley Crue, unless it's the 4 of them.
It's about those guys and the chemistry of those guys.
The studio album, New Tattoo, released in 2000, suffered.
It wasn't a Motley Crue record. It was 3 guys in Motley Crue, and that says it all.
This band is different than most bands because most bands, there's 4 stars in this band.
That year, the band began work on their tell-all autobiography, The Dirt.
Be hanging around on a tour bus, and all day they'd just be going back and forth with these stories. It was just endless, and I thought, I got to do a book on them.
Released in June of 2001, The Dirt confirmed the off-stage antics of the Crue and brought the band to a wider audience.
The book became one of the biggest selling rock books ever because you really got the truth.
As the band turned 20, they were dealt another blow when replacement drummer Randy Castillo died of cancer. Tommy Lee considered returning to the band and restoring the original lineup. But guitarist Mick Mars was undergoing troubles of his own. Mick had been quietly battling a degenerative bone disease called ankylosing spondylitis.
My AS, let's make it easy, AS started way back when I was a kid, and I started noticing my hips were hurting.
It's kind of where like the bone material between your spine just kind of fuses together. And basically it's just in a lot of pain constantly.
Yet for 2 decades, he had kept it to himself.
The guys didn't know that I had it, and I was getting like more and more, bent. And a lot of times they go, straighten up, Mick, and hit me on the back, not knowing how much pain I was in.
It had become harder and harder to perform, and Mick became more and more depressed. Just as the band seemed poised for a reunion, Mick had dropped out of sight.
Nicky, Vince, and Tommy were ready to go, but the guy who was always ready had disappeared. No one could find Mick.
We were trying to get back together, but I was like slowly dying.
In 2004, the release of the tell-all autobiography, The Dirt, had led to a Motley Crue renaissance, and a reunion seemed imminent. But guitarist Mick Mars was lost in a fog of illness, depression, and prescription drug addiction, and he had disappeared from view.
Nicky, who was the guy in the band that kept in touch with Mick, couldn't find him.
Nicky and manager Alan Kovac went to Mick's house, determined to find out what had happened to their friend.
When you opened up that door, you thought you were in a movie. Mick looked like Howard Hughes. He had nails that were 2 inches, 3 inches long. His hip had deteriorated to the point where he couldn't walk. He was down to less than 90 pounds.
Alan Kovac, my manager, came in and he goes, we're going to do something about this now.
And he said, if you can help me, I'm committed to doing it.
First, Mick needed help with his drug problem.
Painkillers, sedatives, if you're taking those kinds of things, they're, highly addictive, and withdrawing from them can kill you.
I desperately wanted to get off this stuff, and I had no way until Alan came in. Alan Kovac and Nicky saved my life.
As Mick overcame his depression and began to manage his medical condition, he turned back to his music.
I hadn't played guitar, I put it down, and I hadn't played for 2 years. It was like that bad. And I slowly started playing again, a little bit at a time. I came back a better player.
Mick was back in action, and Tommy rejoined Motley. In 2005, the band released Red, White, and Crue, their 3rd compilation album, and they set off on the world tour of the same name. The Carnival of Sins tour followed soon after. Mick did both tours and took his place on stage with Nicky, Tommy, and Vince.
I'm not able to do like jumps and rolls and, running around the stage like the other guys do.
His movement is limited, but his hands are just on fire.
Mick Mars is one of the best guitar players that ever lived, and is proving it every day.
He's had to deal with more adversity than just about anybody I know, and he deals with it every day.
Me, I just love to play my guitar. I'll probably be laying on my deathbed with the guitar playing, with all the tubes in me going like, you know what I mean?
In 2008, 27 years after releasing Too Fast for Love on their own label, Mick, Nicky, Tommy, and Vince were back in the studio.
It was time to come together and make their first album in a decade.
The new Saints of Los Angeles album, it's a lot of fun.
Saints of Los Angeles was released in June.
It is loosely based on The Dirt. a lot of good stuff on the record. It sounds sounds, you know, retro.
When this band's on, you know, we're monsters.
Motley was the first group to release a single, Saints of Los Angeles, on the Rock Band gaming platform.
Our fans love Rock Band. Rock Band fans love Motley Crue. For us, it's a way to get our music to a lot of people.
Rock Band has attracted a whole new generation of fans to Motley Crue, as has Crue Fest, which toured throughout the summer of 2008.
It's something that the band has wanted for a long time.
And it's finally happened. Like, we're like, wow, dude, we got our own festival.
Crue Fest played over 40+ cities and was the top-selling tour of the summer. It showcased the talent of younger metal bands like Buckcherry, Trapped, and Papa Roach.
And that's their way of giving back.
Saints of Los Angeles, Rock Band, Crue Fest. Motley has managed to evolve along with the wider world of popular music.
Motley's prided itself in always redefining Motley Crue.
But the Crue's place in rock history was cemented long ago by their hard partying ways.
Motley Crue are the first American band that really showed people this is what sex, drugs, and rock and roll is all about.
When you think of a certain period of music, of life, of lawlessness, you know, Motley Crue is the only band whose name comes to mind.
They're a real rock band, and it's authentic.
These guys have been around me, you know, my whole life, pretty much.
I didn't even want us to last this long. My sole intention was to crash and burn.
I didn't think they would be alive, but they made it past 30. I remind Nikki of that all the time.
The truth is, I like this. The truth is, I'm addicted to this. I'm gonna keep doing it.
We're having a great time. People go, well, what's it like in your heyday? You go, this is our heyday. This is it.
A 25-year longevity, that's something to be proud of.
I mean, when I tour now, I see a lot of the fans that have grown old with me, and they bring their kids, and it's a very cool thing.
We've been having, like, probably more fun than humans are allowed to have.